Michael and Ellen, if you can tell me when we're ready to go once everybody's joined, and then I can start. I can see there's 71.
Yep, I'd say we're good to go now.
Okay, excellent. Good morning and welcome to the Wider Local Studies Seminar. My name is Jo Cooper and I'm from the State Library of South Australia. It's a pleasure to open this National Online Professional Development Seminar, and this 3-day event is for those who work with or have an interest in local studies and local history in libraries across Australia. It brings together a diverse group of professionals to explore a wide-ranging and engaging program, and we're excited to share a fantastic lineup of speakers, topics and sessions that will offer valuable insights and hopefully spark meaningful discussions. There will be opportunities for discussion, sharing and network. Please put your questions in the chat, and we hope you take full advantage of these moments to connect with others in the local studies community. I'd like to take a moment to extend a thank you to Dr. Ellen Forsyth and the organising committee for their work in making this seminar possible. Their efforts have created a rich and inclusive space for collaboration, learning and inspiration. Thank you for joining us. We're pleased to have you here today. Mani Ngā Padni, we acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the country where the State Library of South Australia is situated today, and honour their elders past, present and emerging. We respect their deep and enduring connection to their lands, waters and surrounding clan groups since time began. We cherish the richness of First Nations people's artistic and cultural expressions. I would now like to introduce the presentation by Abby Hoverstock and Laura Ruttam Centuria from Denver Public Library, who speak about their work and experience of a diversity audit conducted by the Special Collections and Archives at the Denver Public Library. As mentioned, please put any questions in the chat and we'll do our best to monitor these. Over to Tech to start the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for joining us today for a talk on the Special Collections and Archives Diversity Audit that we undertook at the Denver Public Library's Special Collections and Archives Unit. My name is Laura Ruttam Centuria. I'm the Archives Access Supervisor, and I'm handing off to my colleague Abby here.
And my name is Abby Hoverstock, and I'm the Archive Services Manager in the Special Collections and Archives. Denver Public Library has a special collections and archives that's unusual for public library systems in the United States, and we have over 5,000 manuscript collections that we oversee and take care of. So we're going to talk about the work that we've done in regards to the Special Collections and Diversity Audit. So our division, Special Collections and Archives, is a subdivision within a large urban public library system that has 27 branch locations. We're located in Denver, Colorado, which is right in the center of the American Rocky Mountain West. Our metro area is just under 3 million people, but our population as a city is about 716,000 people in 2025. Our team and our entire staff includes 30 librarians, archivists, and support staff, and our work comprises two distinct repositories, one at the Central Library and one at the Blair Caldwell African American Research Library. So our presentation today will be to share our experience completing a diversity audit of special collections, which began in 2020. And I will begin by talking about how the audit came about and our process of planning and executing the audit. Then I'll hand it back to Laura, who will discuss what we learned in the audit, how we approached remediation of harmful language, and how the project has informed the work that we do since the audit. So how did the project come about in the first place? Well, the year 2020 brought about the crescendo in the United States of the George Floyd murder and the protests that ensued. This country to work differently and to think differently about what we do. And that was certainly the case in our public library environment, thinking about how the murder and protests affected the way that we should think about our collecting. We also had the COVID pandemic happening around the same time, and the library's closure to the public. And after that, some pretty limited hours and services. And that meant that we had to take we had a moment to pause, to intentionally think about how we could better build an archives for everyone. To do that, we needed to know what our collecting and descriptive deficits were in the first place. We knew we had them, but we really wanted to take this on in earnest. These are the things that the audit clarified for us. So the diversity audit was not just about surveying racial diversity in our collections, but race was one of the important data points that we wanted to explore. So how did our project come about? Our executive leadership team did some comprehensive strategic thinking around the same time. And honoring public trust was named one of our library's core values. Honoring public trust also included actionable values of preserving Denver's history and being good stewards of library collections. These values speak directly to the work that we do in special collections. It was important and helpful for us to ground the work we would do creating a diversity audit of special collections in a framework that was supported by the highest level of our organization. By having the strategic backing of the library, we could ensure that the various steps involved in a diversity audit, including the remediation work that follows, will be supported by the library in the coming months and years, and it ensured that our work would not be abandoned. So as a public institution, our library users are a varied group. DPL customers come from a wide-ranging backgrounds and have a wide range of library skills and lived experiences and backgrounds in doing archival research. We strive to be a local and regional collection with something for everyone. So first, we identified some goals for the audit. We formed some basic questions we hoped the audit could answer for us. We wondered, what do our collections look like as a whole? What stories do they tell? Who is currently documented in our collections and who is omitted? How do we describe the people in our collections? And what can we do as archivists to improve our collections and descriptions right now? The basic questions we started with led to drafting more clear intentions for the project. What are we doing, why, and how are we doing it? A diversity audit would help us understand more about who our collections are created by and who they are about. The information we learn, we hoped, would guide us in future collecting, making decisions about digitization and cataloging efforts. Why are we doing it? Because our description does not always capture the information that library users are seeking. Sometimes it's hard to find information about race or gender identity or disability or the languages that our collections comprise and more. How would we do our project? Well, we decided we would involve staff from across the library to become auditors, and we would create an easy to follow process, clear documentation, and use tools that were available to everyone. Our high-level summary and methodology is this. We pitched the project first to the leadership team, to library supervisors system-wide, and we shared regular updates throughout our whole process with our staff. Our audit took 5 months of planning and drafting, and 15 months of actual auditing every collection. We were able to mobilize staff from across the system remotely. During the COVID work from home era, we had an opportunity to bring in coworkers whose work didn't lend itself very well to online work from home. So we were able to bring folks in from other parts of our library system to help work on this project. And we typically had their support from their supervisors as well. As a group, we audited 5,903 collections using catalog and archive space records, archive space being our content management system. And we used tools from the Google Suite. We were able to review data points for all our special collections without actually opening a physical box. So what did we want to learn? As we got to drafting actual questions for the audit, we had to land on just the questions we felt would be the most valuable to us. We explored which questions could be answered by analyzing keyword search results alone, and which ones needed humans in order to synthesize the information. We identified this list. We specifically wanted to know the geographic locations of our collections, the racial identities of the people involved in our collections. We wanted to know more about gender and sex identities and sexual orientations. We were curious about mental health and disability in our collections. We wondered about religions, the time frames that our collections were created, and the languages of our material. As we designed it, the diversity audit was indeed a project that required human interaction. We needed human power to find the more complex answers we had about our collections. But I do wonder now if there are parts of our audit that could be surveyed using artificial intelligence now or in the near future. However, as Laura will point out later, the human element proved to be critical in the task of remediating harmful language. Some initial project snapshots. What we knew going into the audit included, we knew that we had some historical collecting patterns in our archives. We knew that most of our collections were about powerful and influential people, and those people tend to be in our culture more white, more male, more cisgender, more heterosexual. We knew that we had very few Native American collections and collections created by Indigenous people. And those that we have probably have questionable accuracy in some of our terminology. There are trust issues with libraries. And so that was not a surprise to us. We figured that we probably would not have many Native American collections. We also knew that our collections weren't just 19th century Old West collections. That tends to be a stereotype of the American West, that people think if we've got local history collections in Colorado, it's probably cowboy collections. And we knew that wasn't true. But some things that we hadn't considered before the audit was just how white and male our collections actually were. That it was hard to define those collections because they seem to be the default collections. Those characteristics are typically not even noted in our metadata. For instance, if we have a collection by a first female legislator or African American or Black men, they would be described as such. But if those collections are about men, they would probably just be called legislator or a group of men. And the default would be that they would be white. We also knew that we learned that our descriptions make it hard to identify disability in our collections. Where do you even find mental and physical disability descriptors in historic metadata? And we also were surprised that all sorts of collection management challenges would pop up as a result of doing a diversity audit. So here are some examples of some questions that we actually formulated for the audit itself. We spent a considerable amount of time designing the form. Here's our dates question. Understanding the date ranges of our collection seemed like an easy proposition at first, but when we considered how the data would be presented in the end, we realized we might like to see the concentration of collections over smaller units of time. So we chose decades. The beginning part of this list is centuries, but mostly decades. Auditors were to select all the decades that applied to the coverage of a collection. Later in the presentation, you'll see how this data presented in a nice, easy to understand bar graph. This collection, or this question rather, was about the racial identities represented. We made a list of identities that we felt could plausibly be in our collection, knowing it wasn't complete. But we allowed for multiple choices since many collections contain mention of multiple identities. The screenshot of a catalog record that you see here guided the auditors to look for mentions of racial identities in the free text biographical field, but also in the subject heading fields. We provided a selection for racial identity not listed also, which proved to be a common choice in our audit. And we'll say more about that data point later. We gave some thought to creating the not exhaustive list of names of Native American and Indigenous tribes by surveying tribal websites to determine preferred terminology and connecting with colleagues, our own coworkers with lived experiences to ensure that we used appropriate terminologies. However, some of the terms that have long existed in our catalog are incorrect or offensive. So we had to pair the outdated terminology with the correct terminology, since we knew that those terms would come up in the metadata and we wanted to make sure our auditors could identify them. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who will discuss a little bit more about how we proceeded once the audit was complete and what projects the audit has inspired in the last few years.
Okay, thank you, Abby. Okay, so this is what our end data our results looked like after 15 months of auditing. We basically had a massive spreadsheet of data. We had 5,903 results with at least 18 answers each. But as you'll see, some of our free text fields meant that we got more than the 18 questions that we got more than 18 questions answered. There was some really helpful information, but also a lot of incidental data. So things like people in the biographical notes. Again, useful, interesting information, not so useful from the diversity audit perspective. We also discovered, as Abby mentioned, some collection management issues. We had inconsistencies in collection titles, sometimes between our catalog and archive space. We might have, in some instances, collections in one database, but not in the other. These had nothing to do with the audit's goals per se, but that was useful information that is actionable later. We also found some cataloging errors, typos, date spans that were sometimes inconsistent. And then overall, we found that there were some things that we wished that we had asked differently in order to get better answers. And I'll mention one of those in a little bit. Okay, so this is one example of one of our questions. This was the dates question. And one of the things that we learned from this collection was that, contrary to popular belief, we're not a 19th century Old West collection. Our 20th century collections are actually quite strong. And as you'll note, the strongest decade for our coverage is actually the 1940s. And this was largely due to our 10th Mountain Division records, which document the experience of World War II ski troops who trained in Colorado and then fought in the Italian Alps. We hadn't considered how strongly those collections would point towards this particular decade. It seems obvious in hindsight, but this really helped us understand a little bit more about our collection strength. Looking at our demographic question results overall, we found that many of the results looked very similar to this one, where identity not listed was actually the largest category or the largest result. And first you look at this and you think, what in the world is going on here? But as Abby previously mentioned, the history of cataloging in our country is the primary explanation for what's going on with this particular question. So, historically, if a person who's represented in a collection fit into that sort of default identity that I don't think was necessarily established as a default, I think it was indicative of just people's mindsets. But that identity being white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, Christian, etc., those perceived default identities weren't necessarily called out in our records, but any identity that departs from that category would be. So hence we don't have descriptions that would say something like Mr. Jones was a Caucasian banker who lived in Denver, whereas we would definitely see Mr. Jones was an African-American banker who lived in Denver. So this, of course, meant that our data was more significant in its absence for many of our questions. You can see here that for race, more than 5,000 of our collections show that no information is available, and we assume these collections are related to white folks, but we can't say with 100% certainty, as there's a couple of other potential explanations. But as we were looking at this, we realized that we're more interested in knowing about the communities for which we actually do have some data here, and so the audit still provided useful information for us. You'll recall I mentioned wishing we had phrased certain questions a little bit better. The free text questions were one of these instances. When we began the audit, one of our strategy and assessment folks recommended that we steer clear of free text fields. We ignored her, which was both a mistake, but also our best idea from the whole audit. And this geographic question illustrates the mistake part of that nicely. We asked where the collection was based, and we got towns, counties, states, geographic regions, countries, and continents. And obviously, most of those are overlapping. It's a big mess that we've decided to ignore for now below the state level. And we might take a stab at using AI to help it in the future, but I think that's a project down the road. But I also, in addition to mentioning the mistake part of the free text field, I also mentioned that it was the best idea from the whole audit. And this was because we asked one open-ended question that was about offensive or outdated language in the records. And that question gave us a wealth of actionable data that we're now using in our reparative cataloging efforts. We'll get to what the reparative cataloging looks like in a minute. But first, I wanted to share a few top-level takeaways from the audit itself. So these were excuse me, some of our top-level takeaways from the audit, and I want to specifically point out a couple of them here. One was that certain communities were nearly entirely missing from our collections. We're now working to build relationships with community organizations from some of these groups, and thus far we've been able to bring in a couple of new collections based on this work, but as we all know, these efforts can take many years before they show significant fruit. And then the other piece was regarding the question asking for offensive or outdated language. We received more than 200 responses that highlighted harmful language or that pointed out records that talk about people from an anthropological angle. And by this, I mean language that's tinged with sometimes vague disrespect. It's not necessarily a negative term, but there's something about it that doesn't quite sit with you. Or language that talks about people in an othering way or in minoritizing ways. So looking at our harmful language examples, we decided we needed to form a diversity audit action committee to do reparative cataloging. The lack of clearly offensive terms meant we weren't just trading out a bad word for an acceptable one, but that we would need to do close inspection and rewriting of many of our biographical notes. So we decided to form a diversity audit action committee. Our committee consisted of archivists, librarians, catalogers, and metadata experts. And we have folks from a variety of different demographic identities on the team as well. We later created smaller task forces to address specific issues. The action part of the title was important to us to remind us that there need to be observable goals and achievements from this project. This isn't a navel gazing exercise, but is something that's meant to have achievable ends. So step one for the committee was that we created a Google Drive folder of helpful articles and tools for DEI-informed archival and cataloging practice. These included things like the Homosaurus, which, if you're not familiar with it, is an international linked data project that supports access to LGBTQ collections. Another great example of a resource that we used was the Archives for Black Lives in Philadelphia Anti-Racist Description Resources Report, which is really helpful for resetting how we think about describing communities to which we ourselves may not belong. So after we've done some of our initial research, we grouped our audit results by the themes that we were seeing in the collections, which you see here. The blue themes are the ones that we've addressed so far, and I'll talk a little bit about the Mrs. No First Name issue on the next slide. So anyone who's ever formed a committee knows that there are challenges working with committees, getting them set up, and just in general, setting up your workflows. So I'll share some of our challenges with you here, but also feel free to ask us during the Q&A or to email us afterwards if you have follow-up questions. One of our questions was about committee formation, like how many cooks is too many? Do we have the right folks on the team? We did have some feelings when we first started out. We had assumed we were all on the same page about the goals and methods of the project, but we had one cataloger who hesitated to make significant changes to long-standing catalog records based on newer social movements. I think we could have benefited from more upfront conversations and planning before we jumped in. A big challenge was workflows. You know, with so much to do, where do you start? And that brings up the Mrs. No First Name issue that I referenced on the previous slide. We were looking at collection descriptions where women were identified entirely by their spouse's name. So Mrs. John Jones, for example. And to catch these, we pulled a catalog report of every collection that we had with the word Mrs. in it. And then we needed to research who these women were in order to discover their first names so that we could add them into their subject headings. That was a lot of work, in addition to the workflows of who will update the catalog, who will update archive space, how do we make sure those two databases match, etc. And overall, from this particular issue, we learned that we should just focus on the specific collections that were identified in the audit, even knowing that those same issues will be in other records that may not have been flagged throughout the collection. And then we formed smaller task forces to focus on each theme. And so while we know other collection records contain some of these same problems, searching out additional instances for correction will become part of our future general operations for the cataloging team. And then finally, the harmful language statement. Some of our team worked closely with the library's larger general technical services department and our marketing folks to come up with a harmful language statement that will be used across the whole system. So after having shared a few of the lessons we learned through the audit, I'll wrap up the overall project with some summary points. We're really glad that we undertook this project. We have a much better understanding of our collections now, and this list is some of our takeaways for anyone else who's considering a similar audit. And in the interest of time, I'll just talk about a couple of them. But first, we can't state enough how important it was to the success of our project that we had support from our administration and that we had colleagues who were invested in the work. Another important point is you want to make sure you're front loading all of the thinking forming your questions and ask yourself repeatedly, why do we want to know this particular thing? Is it actionable? How should we craft the question to get the kind of response we're looking for? Another thing we learned is that you should reward your contributors. We raffled gift cards on a monthly basis to encourage folks who were hitting certain auditing milestones, and that really sometimes drove some of the contributions. We had 47 different auditors from across the system who contributed to our audit, and a number of them were rewarded with gift cards. But then we also rewarded their curiosity. A few months after the project ended, we started getting questions about what we had found, and we realized that the staff were really wanting to know, what is in the collection? What did my work contribute to? So we did a staff presentation to share out much of our data, our conclusions, and our next steps. And that last part, the next steps, was very important to a lot of our contributors. And then finally, this work is never done. We definitely learned that. Even if we were able to capture and change every single concerning issue in every record over the next few years, we know that language and society change over time, and the way that we talk about people should evolve and be reevaluated in our records as well. Once our action committee work addressing the 200 specific issues that we found is done, our cataloging folks will be using our diversity audit cataloging manual to inform DEI work going forward, and they'll be looking for those instances on a broader scale. So overall, if you plan to implement a project like this, we think it's important to be humble and to be patient, but also to be brave and to dive in and tackle the project. Overall, your community and your collections will be better for it. So that really sums up the bulk of our diversity audit and our next steps. We'll be opening to questions following this presentation. Please feel welcome to email Abby or myself. Our emails are here if you have any further questions. And we thank you for your interest and your time.
Okay, thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. Ellen, I'm not sure if we actually have our presenters online to answer those questions now. If not, we can move on to our next presenter.
Yes, I can't see that they're online. And I have emailed, but I haven't heard back.
Okay, well, if that's the case, we do have a couple of questions in the chat which we can take to them, but you would have also seen that the email was put up by both the presenters on that last slide. And just to remind you that this seminar is being recorded, so you can go back and watch, and maybe we could put out to everybody the email for everybody for Abby and Laura, Ellen. That might be a good idea. So we'll move on to our next presenter, who does happen to be Ellen. So I'd now like to introduce Dr. Ellen Forsyth from the State Library of New South Wales, who will present on collecting with your community, local studies collections, deliberate practices of inclusion, or collection silences. Over to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Jo. I will just share my screen. Okay, and so hopefully you're seeing my presentation and not my notes. So thank you for coming along today or watching this later. My name is Ellen Forsyth and I work as a consultant in public library services at the State Library of New South Wales. I'm presenting this talk from the lands of the Wangal people who are part of the Eora Nation. For visual description, I'm wearing purple frame glasses and have short hair with natural white highlights. Please put any questions in chat or Q&A and I will try and answer them at the end. I was invited to present information from the doctoral research I undertook looking at local studies collections. I grew up on a farm near a country town where one of the local vegetable shops was owned by someone who migrated from Lebanon. Another vegetable shop was owned by someone descended from Chinese migrants, as was a major supermarket in town called Hong Yuan's. There was and is a Chinese restaurant and there was a Greek cafe. The Kamilaroi people were visible in the community working in a variety of jobs, and this complexity should be visible within local studies collections as well. I was interested in exploring the questions on screen because from my work and some preliminary exploration of the literature, I noted little about representation and collecting recent content for local studies collections. Some of my work is with local studies staff, and there was little recent or contemporary collecting being discussed by them. I see this as a gap given the digital nature of much recent content, but it's not only about digital content. Think about the format of the photographs you take. Are you a digital photographer or an analogue? And trust me, there are always analog photographers in the group. Now, I want you to think about, is your local studies collection seeking to show the whole of the community or only the privileged? And I think some ideas like came through in Denver's presentation really well. Is your collection potentially whitewashing the past or even the present? And if your collection's only telling part of the story of your community, it's biased, and realistically, all collections are biased. A critical difference is really, do you care that some people are rendered invisible by local studies collection decisions in the past and even the present, and through how local histories have been written? The competent humility model described by Dr. Nicole Cook can be helpful for understanding this, and I've got a citation for this as I can't do her model justice here. But for example, last year at the New South Wales Conference for Historical Societies, there was a presentation from one of the societies about their publishing and how great it was. And it really was impressive. But every single book which they'd published in the last 10 years was by a white man of their area and about white men of the area. And this left a lot of the community without their stories being documented. It left out a lot of the complexity and interest. And it was saying that the contributions of some of the men in the community were the only ones which matter. And we know that there's more to the history than this. These photographs show information provided at a park at Lake Mulwala about the local Yorta Yorta people. These signs were written and planned by the local Yorta Yorta people. And this slide is for people who like to know where things are going. With the 3 things to consider, there'll be additional sections to build surprise. And so we're all thinking about the same idea. Here is a definition for local studies. And I would add that it's probably informed representative collecting, as you can't collect everything. And I use the term local studies and not local history because it makes it clearer that economy, geography, community celebrations, for example, are more likely to be included. Plus, I like the way that it highlights the importance of recent content. This shows the importance of photographs from now as well as the past, and note that this flyer has multiple languages on it. Now, this is the draft definition I'm exploring, but it's missing information, although underrepresentative may fit some of the ideas I've been thinking about. And as you'll note, I've added information and note about the importance of representation. I think it might need something about a library may collect local studies items in languages in additional English, but this is really a supplement to the wide definition on an earlier slide. And together, it's the idea of collecting in a deliberate way a range of information or objects to document a community. But there's an assumption, and I've included this definition for social justice, and the activity is important. I think public libraries should be collecting with a social justice approach. And this is an assumption I made during my research, and which I'm making it now, but I'm making it explicit now. A social justice approach to local studies collecting ideally will be representative. It will include positive stories about your community, as well as some shameful ones, which goes back to the idea on an earlier slide about being representative. Shilton and Srinivasan remind us that for everything preserved, there is likely to be something lost. Now, they state as shown on the screen, and this quote is relevant to the social justice one because of the importance of a deliberate and not an accidental approach to local studies collecting. And this one is a stark reminder that your library is unlikely to be able to collect everything created about your area. And the choices of what you actually collect, catalogue, look after, really matter. And they can influence who is remembered in your community and who is forgotten. And I think this came through really well from the Denver Public Library staff too. So for everything added to your collection, something else can't be. That seems obvious. However, wait until you see what my research showed. But we have more quotes first. So Ham, an archivist, takes a blown approach. Now I'm going to slightly modify the first paragraph and read, the most important intellectually demanding task as local study staff is to make an informed selection of information that will provide the future with a representative record of human experience in our time. Now I really like the term informed selection as it has a lot of thoughtfulness. And this bluntness from Ham is helpful as it challenges collecting organisations to look at what and why we are collecting. And the comment about accidental collecting connects to my finding, which I'll get to soon. But what Ham is saying also lines up with Shilton and Srinivasan, and that they make the point that our collecting organisations need to do our jobs well, being deliberate about what we do, because however much we'd like to, everything cannot be saved. The library I researched rarely said no to unsolicited donations, used relational decision-making, and was at risk of collecting from cliques. And this first point means that those who know they can donate do. Now, this might sound obvious. However, there are issues of privilege with this, both with knowing you can donate and feeling sure that information from you, your family, or your business has value compared with other people who may not know they can donate, may not feel the same way that the information about them, their family, their business or community organisation has a right to be in the local studies collection. Also, not everyone has items or objects to donate. Maybe the donors have things because their family is well off, have lived in the area for a long time. They could have stolen things. There are lots of potential reasons, but this was not the focus of my research. But all of this can contribute to collection bias because of who has stuff and gives it to the library. And keep in mind, and this is actually really important, it's mostly unsolicited donations, so that the collecting is driven potentially by the donors and not the library collection plan. People offer you information about the area, and as a library you rarely say no because you don't want to lose it. but it means that you're collecting part of the story of your area about privilege and potentially entitlement, but not a nuanced and complex account of your area. Remember the quote on the previous screen. When archivists choose to preserve one memory, they forfeit the resources, human, physical, and financial, to preserve another. So unsolicited donations impact the representation of your community, and accepting unsolicited donations is choice. And this is choosing to privilege the stories of those who have items to donate and think they belong in your library. Now, relational decision making, people who know you are more likely to provide an influence. Again, this may not be bad, but we must be cautious because it could be collecting from a mate's network rather than an informed, representative, deliberate and planned way. What if your library only has relationships with people who have a specific kind of accent, or who all went to the one school, where there's more than one school in an area, or who all have the same skin tone or political view? This means you're only collecting information about this aspect, potentially amplifying their influence when other people have been made to appear as if they're invisible. Remember the Historical Society, which has at least 10 years of only publishing the stories of local men. Think about how this is pushing the stories of an area in a particular way. This is not the whole truth of the area. Now, this quote on screen still shows that it depends on people having material to donate. And there are lots of reasons why people may not have things to donate. And this approach can lead towards older items rather than what is telling the current or recent story of collecting of an area. Now, collecting older information is important. However, limited contemporary or rapid response collecting can restrict whose stories are included. It may leave out recent migration or other demographic changes, natural disasters, pandemics, floods, fires, droughts, mouse or locust plagues, changes in what businesses are open and what are closed, newer kinds of agriculture or other food production, and so much more. It may leave younger people out of the documenting of an area, or First Nations people, culturally and linguistically diverse people, people with disability and women. And so your local studies collection has the potential to influence silences. So take action. So you're helping to give voice to stories and people and to stop silences. Earlier this year, New South Wales Public Libraries completed a very detailed survey, over 80 questions, about their local studies collection. Now, I'm yet to make my way through all the data, and these show the results of very specific questions about recent content. And as a note, the drought, which included 2018-2019, was for many parts of New South Wales the worst drought on record by a long way, leading to large numbers of livestock being sold, amongst other impacts. And there are 3 public libraries who have anything about it in their collections. However, if we move along in time, we see 18 libraries who have something about the Black Summer bushfires, including photographs and oral history. And the COVID pandemic also has more. And the floods, that's probably an ever-increasing amount of collecting. So while the collecting around the drought looks bleak, I think there's a lot more optimism that can be seen in the greater amount of more recent collecting for other topics. So when a local studies collection does not represent the whole community the public library serves, it is collecting and preserving a biased account of that community. Now, the bias could initially unintentional or unconscious, but it's still there, and the outcome is not reflective of community diversity. So I'd like you to think about what you've collected in 2025 so far and what it says about your community. And if you've not collected anything about 2025, not even a single photograph, flyer, oral history or recording, that creates another set of issues. It's important that you make sure that you're deliberately including your community in your local studies collection rather than deliberately excluding them. And it really is deliberately excluding them. And it can be a simple starting point, making sure, for example, that women as well as men are interviewed for oral histories, and that younger people as well as older people are included because of different perspectives, and that those interviewed have varied cultural backgrounds. So you're deliberately including people. Now, I'm going to go through some of these points in more detail, and I'm still working through the best ways to express this. And if I'm feeling optimistic, I might write it up for paper this year. And please remember the assumption I made earlier, that a social justice approach to local studies collecting is good practice. So what does your local studies collection say about your community? Have a good look at it. What is it telling you? This is all of the items, older and newer. What do you learn about your community by what is already in your local studies collections? Think about the presentation before from Denver. What did they find out about by really looking at their collection? Who was not telling their own story? Who was not visible in the story of the area? And what bad words had been used for cataloguing? So, are Aboriginal people included in your collection, especially in works they've written or created? Or are they stories by other people? How are migrants depicted? Does it depend on where the migrants came from and what languages they speak or spoke? How is racism addressed? Do you have anything about people with disability? And it was helpful to hear from Denver how difficult that was to identify through catalogue records. How visible are women? How visible are people who are LGBTQI+? And these are only a few of the questions. What format you collect can influence whose stories are included, as not everyone has items to donate. If you predominantly collect books for local studies, it means people or organisations have had to publish them. Or do you include self-published and print-on-demand titles or books? And even if you do, think about who is not visible in those published. If you collect photographs, who took them? Are they digital? Or have you not been collecting digital photographs, even though it's 2025? What is your donor form like? Does it allow for digital donation? Does it allow for Creative Commons to be used? So you don't have to track the life of the photographer plus 70 years. Similarly with oral histories, what accompanying documentation is required if these are donations? These questions can sound complex, but they don't have to be. But also, is it as simple as has recent content been catalogued, or is it on the queue, waiting on a portable hard drive with no additional preservation copy? Some of you will know that I'm a fan of Chopsticks or Fork. Have a look at it on ABC iView if you've not watched it. And since there's now a book, I did a spot check on Trove to see if any of the libraries which had a Chinese restaurant profiled in it had a local studies question. And they don't. Is this a problem? Maybe. But it highlights that it can be hard to know about local information if it's in one chapter of a book, like The Uncommon Hangman by Rachel Franks and Courting, An Intimate History of Love and the Law by Alicia Simons. Both of these actually cover a lot of places, particularly across New South Wales, but Courting does have Australia-wide examples. And these are other ones which I regard as almost accidental local studies books. And yet these three books have great information about local areas. Local Chinese restaurants from Chopsticks or Fork, local crime and hangings in the book by Rachel Franks, and breach of promise cases in Courting. And I figured we needed a dragon, seeing as I was talking about Chopsticks or Fork. But before I continue along with where I was going, I'm going to explore a few asides listed on the screen. Now, the heading on this slide is inspired by Dr. Alexandria Delios and her recent book, Heritage Making and Migrant Subjects in the Deindustrializing Region of the Latrobe Valley. In this book, Dr. Delios looks at how the stories of culturally and linguistically diverse people are recorded, specifically industrial areas which may no longer be industrial, like the Latrobe Valley, and where workers have moved away. And this is what local studies could be about. Privileging ordinary storytelling, as the stories of the ordinary have their importance. And this fits with the social justice as well. The image from the ABC program, the image on the screen is from the ABC program The Season. And this shows some of the women in the Vanuatu national cricket team. In 2023, they played in southeast Queensland while they were working there as seasonal workers. And this was part of their preparation for the T20 World Cup. My question would be, how visible are they in local studies collections? As well as the women's team playing in southern Queensland, the men, quite a few men in the Vanuatu national cricket team played in a team called Vanthorpe in the Stanthorpe area. Now, both the women and the men are some of the top cricketers in Vanuatu and are in Australia as seasonal workers. Documenting stories like this looks like privileging ordinary storytelling. So whose stories are collected can help show the values of a community. And seasonal workers have a lot of value. And you can see another example of this in the next slide. This lovely photograph was purchased by the State Library of New South Wales and was taken by Darren Clark of seasonal worker Olvi Deborah, working on the packing line at Sunrise Mill, Deniliquin, New South Wales, on the 30th of April last year. So these kinds of images are bringing us to the metaphor of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. This was written about by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, and it came because of research by her, as well as other people, into how likely children in the USA, who were not white, would be to see themselves represented in the stories they were reading. And the answer in the late 1980s and early 1990s was not very likely. There continues to be research into representation in children's books, with often still very depressing data the result. However, I think there's relevance for considering this concept for local studies, to ask how representative are local studies collections, and how well do these collections reflect or mirror the community? Whose stories are visible and whose are ignored? Mirrors reflect stories like yours back to you, windows let you see into other stories, and sliding glass doors allow you to step into other experiences. And so this leads to questions of how local studies collections can assist in amplifying voices and histories which may have been silenced. This is taking a social justice perspective and privileging ordinary storytelling. So we're back at my assumption. Please keep in mind whether the lack of collecting in some areas was or is accidental exclusion or deliberate exclusion, the outcomes are the same. Stories are not collected and people are excluded. And you really do want to be telling the whole story of your community rather than a small part in a huge amount of detail. This shows the State Library of Queensland image, which is assisting in documenting rodeos in Queensland. Multiple narratives is of relevance to the research I did because it notes that local studies staff have a responsibility to maybe be better at telling the whole story of our communities. Otherwise, we continue to marginalise people or groups in our communities and we miss out on stories we could all learn from. For example, the stories of the cricketers who work as seasonal workers in Stanthorpe are different to the locals who live there all the time. These different perspectives of living and working and playing cricket in the Stanthorpe area could provide multiple narratives. And multiple narratives to be encouraged, so we're not providing a single story. And note, this is not mal, mis, or disinformation, but rather different experiences of the same event. These photographs were taken at Liverpool Museum in Western Sydney during an exhibition last year called Exilio, and it's about people who migrated to Australia from Chile as a result of the 1973 coup, which brought Augusto Pinochet to power. It describes their different experiences of leaving Chile, and they left because their lives were threatened or the lives of family members were threatened. It includes their descriptions of living in Western Sydney. These were filmed oral history, mostly in Spanish, which was documenting their experiences, and there were subtitles. And so each library could explore whose voices and stories are not collected and preserved in their local studies collection, like Denver Public Library did. And this includes considering informed representative collecting, working with multiple stories to better record what a community is really like. So are many different perspectives available in your local studies collection, or are a few reflected in many ways like a mirror ball? A social justice approach to local studies has the potential to provide a representative record of the community as a wider range of voices and stories are included. And this then is beneficial in giving greater visibility to all of our communities so that each local studies collection reflects and represents the heterogeneity of the community, including voices of First Nations people, women, younger people, people who live with disability, people who are culturally and linguistically diverse, economically disadvantaged and more, because they might not be included in your current collections. You may be collecting from people whose first language is English, who are privileged to have well-documented lives, and not necessarily recording first language or bilingual oral history. And because you can't collect everything, taking a representative approach is more likely to actually represent your community, rather than mostly accepting unsolicited donations, which may be more likely to demonstrate the privilege of those who have them donate. Again, it's not an either-or, but rather a both approach. So because we can't really fix collecting practices from the past, Recent and contemporary collecting, including content creation, can help reflect the current community so that it's well documented for the future. Now, I've made it who or where is not visible because, as well as being people, it can be places that are rendered invisible. Now, I'm putting this back up as a reminder because Shilton and Srinivasan are reminding us that for everything preserved, there is likely to be something lost. Are you losing the information about certain locations and communities because of how you're undertaking your collection? Definitely consider analysing your collection, and it could be a diversity audit like Denver undertook, or at least an audit of part of the collection. This photograph is part of the Museum of Victoria collection and shows Naza Eid, a migrant from Lebanon with her children, in front of Home with Taxi in Melbourne in 1982. I think it's a rather lovely one. And as Denver also highlighted, it's important to document and admit to collection gaps. Now, it mightn't be doing a full audit, but it means you can take action and it can be built into library planning. So a deliberate approach is possible and not the accidental approach from unsolicited donations, no matter how amazing they are. It may be that you have some short-term collecting priorities to fill gaps. For example, both the State Library of Queensland and New South Wales undertake this. And this example from Western Australia is a lovely example of documenting workplaces. So, for example, the State Library of New South Wales collects material that documents the life of New South Wales, but we also have some specific contemporary collecting priorities. At present, they are LGBTQI+, election ephemera, First Nations collecting, including Black Lives Matter, as well as bushfires, drought and flood in New South Wales. And definitely, as Denver raised, think about the cataloguing, preservation and access. How things are catalogued can show bias, so you may need to change how your cataloguing is undertaken, and there may be some past examples of bad language which need to be updated or annotated with more modern language. The guidelines for First Nations collection description by Tui Raven was discussed by her last year in Wider Local Studies, so you can go back to last year's recording and check it out. So does the cataloguing help or hinder? Does the cataloguing lack detail? Is your collection fully catalogued? And what access do people have to your collection? And how are you preserving it to the future? But this question on the screen here loops back to the assumption I made earlier, that of a social justice approach to local studies being essential. Now, in this quote from Sheffield, information centres can be read as local studies collections, and the idea of stewarding unexplored histories is powerful, but to steward them, you've got to be able to collect them. And to change practices, deliberate action needs to be taken so that libraries can steward unexplored histories and preserve materials documenting a diverse and pluralistic society, because that's the world we live in. I always think looking at your collection plan matters. What does it actually say about local studies? Are you doing what it says will happen? Does the wording need to be updated for greater clarity? Collection plans are a critical way to tell your community what matters when you can't show them what and who by what is in the collection because of gaps. And make sure you're not saying you're collecting everything about your community. No one has that much staff, space or money. You could say you'll undertake informed representative collecting for your community. This may mean collecting all print and ebooks and collecting a sample of photographs in your community, and your own council could be quite helpful for providing some of the photographs. Well, you have rolling priorities to make up for past gaps. For communities of change, weddings could actually be a really interesting area to document, as people have different styles. And if your collection plan says nothing about local studies, does that mean you're not collecting in a planned way? Where is the accountability to your community? Or are you predominantly collecting unsolicited donations from people and organisations who think their information has a right to be preserved and not seeking out other information available about the community? In my research, I found that unsolicited donations can mean donors are shaping the collecting more than the staff. And because this depends on who has stuff to give the library, and this stuff shapes the collection potentially in an uncritical way. This photograph shows part of the Freedom Ride Memorial opened in 2023 at Walgett, New South Wales, which increases the visibility of this event from 1965. And it brings together historic photographs, new artworks, and information with newer interpretations of this history. For example, in 1965 in Walgett, only white women were allowed in the local dress shop. Now, this is something where older collections could be leveraged to create new content. Although, as discussed earlier, gaps and silences are still gaps and silences. And I think that for many collecting organisations, that practices may need to change so there are more counterpoints to unsolicited donations, with more informed representative selecting and the challenge of refusing some donations, because they're about many mirrored events and not providing new windows. And to quote Hay, I like Hay, we need to make an informed selection of information that will provide the future with a representative record of human experience in our time. Now, I think that's actually a really weighty call, but it is a good call to action. I think I'd like to see a bit more content creation, like the photograph examples from the state libraries of Queensland, Western Australia, New South Wales, and more oral history like Liverpool Museum undertook. But I also know that the dollars to do this work can be difficult. I think if changes to collecting are made, they have the potential to expand each of our understanding of our communities, as well as increase interest in local stories, as more people can see themselves reflected in them. Content creation is excellent for local studies. Often it will be photography and oral history recordings, which we'll be hearing more about tomorrow, but could include other methods such as board games or tabletop role-playing games, ambient sound recording and zines. Whatever it is, it needs planning. It should be in the collection plan. It needs resources, it needs workflow, it needs training, it may need partnerships, and it has the potential to provide a representative view of the area. So it's important to think, who does the library have relationships with? Do the library staff have to get to know new people or community groups because they're not visible in the local studies collections? Maybe other colleagues across your organisation may already have connections. And what goes into the local studies collection should not be as a result of an exclusive network. It's okay to deliberately target organisations and groups to connect with, because not everyone knows about local studies collections. And think back to the examples of the seasonal worker temporary workers photographic project. This photograph shows 2 weeks after the 2022 floods in Lismore. And it may be that for photographs like this, community connections can help reach these kinds of areas in your communities. Now, I put social justice here as a reminder. There are citations, so if you'd like these, let me know. I have an email address. And I know I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again because I feel strongly about it. We may not be able to fix collecting practices from the past, but recent and contemporary collecting, including content creation, can help reflect the current community so that it is documented for the future. I will now answer any questions. Okay, my apologies for speaking so slowly. I really couldn't see the chat when I was talking. Really sorry you're getting grayed out areas on the screen. That's not good. I don't know why. I do think it would be a good idea. I think the idea of a potential template for a local studies collection policy could be helpful. That's probably something that could be done cooperatively. Who knows? It could be even a project that it's suggested that we do nationally as part of wider local studies. I think for practical things, Joe, I'd be starting small. But I think looking at your collection and whether it's a full diversity audit like Denver undertook, or whether it's also everyone doesn't have a Denver size collection. They have a population of 700,000. That's bigger than any local government area in New South Wales, and bigger than probably most local government areas in Australia. So they're a little bit bigger than all of us. But I think looking at it and seeing, but also I think really seeing your community. When you're out and about in your community, are you noticing the new Asian grocery store, that in the local supermarket, the seasonal workers are hanging around on hot days because they don't have other air-conditioned options? How are you actually seeing your own community, I think, is actually really important. Tonya, that's a great suggestion, but that's a discussion I'd have to have in my workplace. But I also think it's something that would be better done cooperatively. But I would be happy, I think, to work in cooperation on that. Yes, and good point, Nicole. There is an earlier one. I'm just skimming down. Yes, I'll be able to email the citations. I'll make a note, email citations. I can put a link in with the evaluation. I think that's a really good question, Liz, and a tough one for each organisation, because every organisation needs to make sure that it's actually got robust methods for digital preservation, or at least digital care, and you'll be hearing a bit more about that from Matthew Burgess tomorrow. And also, I think some of it is around an adjusting of thinking, because with digital collecting, if you collect it close to the time of content creation, it means you can set pathways for care in place. Because if someone in 10 years' time comes in with, if someone comes in now with a 10-year-old USB drive, it may not be even able to be accessed, whereas a 10-year-old piece of paper can be. So I think it's really a slight shift in how we think about it, that with digital content, it's getting it much sooner rather than later. Yes, good point, Michelle. Yeah, I actually think it is getting the whole community understanding local studies, and that can be done through a range of processes that your library's already potentially connecting with. And I think there's one of the 10-minute talks coming up from Queensland, I forget whether it's today or tomorrow, that combines local studies and events in libraries, and in a quirky way. And it may be that some of those different connections, but it also could be using additional council processes. Good comment, Charlie. I think it definitely is challenging, and I think some of it is about building long-term relationships, but it's also showing trust in small ways, that we've done this thing. Could you help us do another thing? It's not. You've all got limited resources, both people. Well, not both. People, funding, space, a whole lot of things. So it's how you work this out. But it's really, I think, making sure that you're looking at the whole breadth of your community for who goes in, for whose lives and experiences are documented in local studies. And I think that it's a continuing conversation to have. Yeah, good point with Sylvia about definition, but this is, I'd say, a further discussion point. Maybe, Michelle. I think there probably is some gender diverse work done, but I would have to look. So I'm not as familiar with that as with Tui Raven's work now. I think there's one more question down the bottom. Yes, I missed that one. Yes, so my apologies for speaking too quickly. And I'm just going to check if there's any additional questions I missed. No. So we're running a little bit earlier because we didn't have the Denver people able to make it online for questions. So we'll actually get a slightly longer break now. So we'll be, because we're different time zones, I'm going to keep it more as in, we'll be back in 47 minutes time. And we have a very interesting range of 10-minute talks from several states and territories across Australia. So we'll see you back in 47 minutes time. See you then. Bye. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back. And we're back for the second session today. My name is Ellen Forsyth. I work at the State Library of New South Wales, and I'll be chairing this session. We have 10-minute talks this afternoon. I'll be driving the slides for most of them. Each presenter has a 10-minute block of time. They can choose to talk for all of it and answer questions in chat, or they can choose to talk for 7 or 8 minutes and allow a couple of minutes to answer questions by voice. This is their call. Please put any questions in chat and we'll get started. First up is Holly Millwood talking about educational history and site studies, material for classroom and home. Holly's from New South Wales. Over to you, Holly.
Thank you, Ellen. Afternoon, everyone. Let me just share. Okay. Afternoon, everyone. I'm a community history officer at the Inner West Council, and today I'm going to show you our suite of site studies that we are launching this month and promoting throughout this year, with topics on factories, Aboriginal history, LGBTQ+ history, the suburb of Ashfield, and 19th century ocean pools. This inquiry-based studies and historical resources are designed for years 7 to 10 history syllabus, funded through a New South Wales Heritage Grant. These are developed for history teachers by collaborating with archaeologists, professional historians, and teachers. In these site studies, students can develop analytical skills using historical sources to undertake inquiries and communicate their results. For teachers, they can incorporate an engaging local history to students, all connecting back to our history collection and the change of site over time. The first study we have covers the area of Marrickville Metro, where the Vic and Wooler mills once stood. You can see from these photos that the mill house is still present next to the current shopping centre. In 1893, John Vickers purchased the buildings, producing cloth from Australian wool, and managed government contracts, supplying blankets and uniforms for railway workers, then later the Army, Navy, and Air Force in both World Wars. During this time, he employed many women and girls as young as 14 that all comprised 75% of Vickers' labour force. The mill closed in the 70s with the buildings being demolished. The next is Dawn Fraser Pool at Balmain. This is an exploration of a larger site, with developments of the site's change and encompassing a rare surviving example of an 1880s ocean pool. We also cover the history of famous swimmers, women's inclusion, the water polo club and social activities, as well as the National Box Factory that once stood next door, as well as the White Horse Point and its rowing club. With all this information, we wanted it to come to life and to show its intergenerational appeal. This led to a collaboration between the Inner West Council and its history team. Michael Rampey of Realistic Imaging, the creator of the 3D pedestal platform, and the Friends of Dawn Fraser Pool in the development of an interactive resource in virtual reality. This interactive technology provides a space for engagement, blending historical learning with the latest digital innovations. Using aerial and ground-based photography and laser scanning in a process called photogrammetry, which are the examples playing now. Interactive elements include 3D objects, 360 images, deep zooms and comparison sliders, as well as this full custom VR experience. This can be viewed using a VR headset or on a phone, tablet, and computer through the website. There's lots to explore and discover, hidden away in all these areas of the VR, with the photos and historical information as well as primary sources, all on the specifically designed website. This history, like other site studies, can be scaled to older primary school years and for university students, as well as allowing historians, archaeologists, architects, teachers, the public and local community to explore this VR in their own time. We have also got 4 works focusing on Aboriginal history, researched and written by Inner West's cultural advisor, Deborah Lennis. The first topic is a look into Aboriginal identities of who lived and worked in the Inner West. Douglas Grant, who was taken from his home in northern Queensland and brought to New South Wales as part of the Stolen Generation. He was adopted into a family of the Scottish taxidermist Robert Grant. He went to a prestigious private school in the Inner West suburbs and had a passion for drawing. He worked many jobs throughout his life, such as a mechanical draftsman for Mort's Dock in Balmain. He later enlisted in World War I to fight for his country. However, to the New South Wales Aboriginal Protection Board, he was a non-citizen. This was evident when his unit was departing Sydney for the war. He was prevented from leaving, as, quote, much to his disgust of his comrades, he was one of the most popular fellows in the company. He later fought in the First Battle of Bullecourt in France. He was then captured, spending almost 2 years confined to a German POW camp, becoming an object of fascination for German doctors, scientists, and anthropologists. He returned, like many other soldiers in World War I, suffering from mental health issues, which led to places like Callan Park Mental Institution to open for ex-servicemen. He spent his time fighting for social justice Aboriginal people and helping design and build the Callan Park War Memorial, photographed here. Other topics cover the self-determination and autonomy of First Nations people, including the Freedom Rides, the 67 referendum, the Tent Embassy, Land Rights Act, Mabo, and the National Apology. With one case study about the survival memorials at Yeo Park in Ashfield, a significant meeting place for Aboriginal communities who gathered there to discuss law and important community issues. Inner West Council worked with the Aboriginal community to promote this cultural heritage, addressing areas of disadvantage and the protection and preservation of the environment. In doing so, building relationships with these local Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal communities, enhancing everyone's lived experience and promoting reconciliation. Our next study focused on the LGBTQ+ history from the 1970s until today, as many of Australia's most prominent and groundbreaking LGBTQ+ activists were prominent in Sydney. This site study aims to foster students' interest in these individuals and reflect on major social changes. 2 key events that we cover is the establishment of the organisation Camp Inc. in the Inner West, which was an advocacy group that fought for legislative change, as well as offering support services for individuals and ran community events. the first ever Mardi Gras in Sydney in 1978, as many Inner West residents helped to organise this event, including Camp Inc. members. Photographed here is long-term Inner West resident Robin, a camp executive resisting arrest and appearing on the front pages of the Telegraph, resulting in the loss of her job. Even with this police violence and arrests, Mardi Gras has taken place every year since, improving the visibility of the community. We have also covered the area and suburb of Ashfield. In 1838, the rural nature of Ashfield was considered an area to live and visit to preserve one's health, as, quote, a perfect cure for town luxuries and indulgences. Ashfield was one of the 4 only stops on the rail line between Sydney and Parramatta when it opened in 1855. Most notably, the famous Quong Tart was a successful businessman and community member for Ashfield, running significant tea rooms in Sydney, and one of the handful of public areas in Sydney women could gather. His employees, mostly waitresses, were treated well, working reasonable hours, provided meals in the restaurant, and allowed free time for needling and reading. The resource kits we are providing as part of the sites give teachers a range of tools, including a text-based guide, videos, photos, a PowerPoint, and linked bibliographies and primary sources, as well as the important teacher notes and student worksheet questions. If you would like to keep an eye out for the Dawn Fraser website to explore the VR or the other history studies, as we begin to make them public, you can visit our website or scan this QR code. And if anyone has any questions about the project or want to learn more, you're welcome to reach out to our team as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holly. That was really interesting. You've got a minute if people want to ask questions, but people have longer if they would like to ask questions of Holly in chat, as she'll be staying online for the rest of the session today. I think it sounds a really interesting project and of a lot of interest to the general public as well as students. Oh yeah, someone would like the QR code back.
I'll give that back. Are you able to see the QR code?
Please join me in thanking Holly. That was absolutely fabulous. And please continue to ask her further questions in chat. Thank you so much, Holly.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll now introduce our next 10-minute speaker, Tisha Nahern, who is going to talk about local history from the bottom up and is from Victoria. I'm just going to share the screen for that.
Thanks, Ellen. Good morning, everyone. So my name's Tisha. I work at Marybeck Libraries in Melbourne, and I'll just start off with an acknowledgement of country. So I'm coming to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and acknowledging that their sovereignty was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'm here to talk to you about a really exciting project called Queer Histories, Queer Futures, a Marybeck audio tour podcast, and kind of give some insights about how the project was run, why I think it's important to talk about a project like this in local studies, in a local studies forum. So thank you to Ellen and State Library of New South Wales for having me here and everyone who's been involved. So the next slide, please, Ellen. So this was meant to be a little joke. So history from the bottom up. So as we heard in the presentation this morning, you know, the importance of local studies engaging with communities as they actually are, and really interrogating the practice of local studies, whose voices are being included, whose voices are being excluded. This project, Queer Histories, Queer Futures, really sought to take a people's history, community history approach and telling a story, telling histories from the bottom up, from the ground up, or from the grassroots, rather than coming in with so-called experts to tell people about their histories and communities. So the communities speaking for themselves. So the next slide, please, Ellen. So Queer Histories, Queer Futures, Mirabeg Audio Tour is, as the name might suggest, a history of LGBTQIA+ communities in the area now known as Mirabeg in Melbourne, which is in the inner north. So municipality in the inner north, spanning Brunswick in the south, all the way to Fawkner and Glenroy in the north. Mirabeg is a really diverse municipality, and the library service has run a number of local studies, local history projects in the past, including for different multicultural communities. More recently, I was involved in running a project called the People's History of Brunswick, which was about unemployed workers organising in the 1930s in the Great Depression. So why take the format of a oral history? Why take the format of an audio tour or a podcast audio tour when talking about queer histories? So what was, as I sort of alluded to before, it's about queer people, so communities talking for themselves about their own histories. So in this case, queer people, LGBTQIA+ communities, talking about their histories themselves. Oral histories allow people to tell their own stories. Podcasts are a really accessible medium, really engaging. They really catch people's attention and they can be listened to all sorts of settings. It's also about the success of past projects such as the People's History of Brunswick from 2018. Next slide, please. So the project was launched. So I'm going to kind of jump to launch and then we'll kind of work backwards about how this whole project worked. So we launched the project for Midsummer, which is Melbourne or Victoria's Queer Arts and Culture Festival. That was launched on the 4th of February this year. And we had it in a new park, lovely new park opposite Brunswick Town Hall on Sydney Road in Brunswick here where I am. We had a panel discussion featuring Wurundjeri Elder Annette Zibris, who was one of the guests in the podcast audio tour, along with 3CR community radio producer James McKenzie, who was one of the producers for the tour, one of the two producers. And we had over 100 people attending, so absolutely overwhelming success. The park was absolutely full, which was great to see. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about how this project was progressed, how we made it, and the choices that we made. So the next slide, please, Ellen. So the project was produced. So we engaged a community radio station to produce the audio. So we kind of looked at what capacities did we have in-house in the library service. Our capacities were things like research. So the research was conducted in-house by a group of queer and trans library staff called the Lee Ellis Working Group here at Mirabeg Libraries. So I conceived of the project. I used the Lee Ellis team to convene the research. We did the research in-house, drawing on in-house materials and also community engagement. And we engaged a community radio station, 3CR Community Radio, to produce the audio. That was some capacity that we didn't have internally. So the interviews were conducted by and produced by James McKenzie and Nikki Stott from 3CR Community Radio. The majority of the interviews were in the 3CR studio with a small number happening over Zoom, one which included delivering an iPad to an interviewee so that she could do it sort of with a microphone and have good setup. That allowed us to have really good quality audio production. It's really important when we're thinking about these things that we respect the mediums that we work with. And so we're working with sound, with audio, and so we wanted to get experts in audio production involved, and that's why we chose 3CR Community Radio. Just a note on 3CR Community Radio, they're Australia's oldest community radio station. In fact, they're the reason why we have community radio in Australia, and they also had the first, as was called, gay and lesbian show at the time, also longest running trans and gender diverse programs. And so having 3CR was really crucial in terms of their really long-standing connection with the queer community. And in fact, some of the interviewees we simply couldn't have gotten without 3CR, without the immense amount of respect that the LGBTQIA+ communities has for 3CR Community Radio and the connection that our producers had with them. So next slide, please. So collaboration. Probably should have had this one beforehand. So the Lee Ellis Working Group here at Mirrabooka Libraries, that's a group of queer and trans staff at the library service. We've been responsible for running all sorts of internal and external programming within the library and working with our library teams. So it was our project, and we did the research. We partnered with 3CR Community Radio, also got some assistance from AQUA, the Australian Queer Archives, or previously known as ALGA, who were really instrumental in doing some really important research for us, especially about Pentridge Prison. And again, looking for where expertise that we didn't have within the library service, which included an artist and designer. So Nikki Minus from the Workers Art Collective here in Melbourne was our artist and designer for the leaflet and map and flyer. So next slide, please. So identifying gaps. So despite having one of the highest populations of LGBTQIA+ identifying people in Victoria, there was a striking lack of documented and published LGBTQIA+ histories in Mirrabooka. So our project, Queer Histories, Queer Futures, sought to address this lack of community history by creating an accessible audio tour to celebrate Mirrabooka's LGBTQIA+ histories and community aspiration. Next slide. So the research, I think these slides maybe might have gotten a bit out of order, which is my fault. The research started with a scoping workshop all the way back in February 2019, that should say. And I ran a little workshop here at Brunswick Library back in February 2019, just to scope out whether there was enough interest and information out there in the community. And we heard that it clearly was. Then in February 2024, big gap, we engaged in our next round of community consultation through our Conversations Mirrabooka online platform. Our Lee Ellis Working Group also conducted research and consultation along with the Queer Archives and also consulting with Council's internal LGBTQI+ reference group and the Wurundjeri Wurrung Council, and also 3CR producers. Jump to the next slide. Apologies, I'm racing through this a bit. So being an oral history, being a community history, and being a history told by people who are still alive, it is by its nature a living history. And that's one of the beauties of oral histories, and also people's voice, having recorded voice, means that people's voices live on. But we're also expanding on this and trying to make the project live on as a living history. So at the end of this month, on Saturday, the 28th of June, we're running a listening party here at Brunswick Town Hall, where we will pull out edited extracts of audio and use that as a prompt for a facilitated conversation, which will open up the space for participants to share their own history and dig a bit deeper into the stories told in the series, along with some of the interviewees, which will help guide us through a discussion. So in this way, we have this published history, but we're also, running events which will kind of build on it. Then come springtime, we're hoping to run an actual walking tour of the sites of, if not all 14 sites on the tour, many of them. Next slide, please. So quickly, how is the history actually published? How is this project actually published? So we have a map designed by the wonderful artist and designer Nikki Minus. It's published on the 3CR Community Radio website. It has its own page. It's available as an RSS feed in your podcast app of choice, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. And it also exists as a geolocated, so geo-triggered audio tour in a special app called Echoes, which is an app for geolocated audio tours. So there's 4 different published outcomes for this tour and different ways that people can experience it. The map obviously augments either people walking on the tour or listening to it as a podcast from the comfort of their own home. Next slide. So that's all. Really raced through it. Apologies for sort of having to race through that, but happy to take any questions if there's any further time for questions, or also very happy for people to get in touch with me to discuss further. But thank you. Wow.
Sorry, I'm losing control of my slides. Thank you so very much, Tishan. That was fabulous. And I really like the sound of the listening party as well, and an obvious method to fill in gaps in collecting. Please ask Tishan any questions relevant questions in chat, and we'll now move on to the next presentation. But please, yeah, that was a fabulous presentation. Thank you so much. Our next presenter is also from Victoria. Ellen Coates will be talking about collecting movies and TVs in local history. Over to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Ellen. So we can have the first slide, please. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful. Thank you. So I want to start also by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. So I'm Ellen. I'm from the PMI Victorian History Library. We're an independent specialist history library in Prahran in Melbourne that covers all of Victoria. So we're effectively like a larger scale local history collection. Next slide, please. So what am I talking about? From a purely technical perspective, I'm talking about, when I'm talking about movies and television programs, I'm talking about documentaries, both in movies and television programs, but also fictional programs, including animation, though I'm yet to find any animation that's been specifically relevant, or combinations of all of the above. And I'm speaking about digitized, born digital, and digital material with a physical carrier. So it's quite a broad medium. Next slide, please. So why, oh, that's gone way too far. These aren't in order. Yeah, that one. Thank you. Why movies and television programs? So at the most basic level, it's about recognizing that local history is more than books, papers, written resources, and other static material. It's incredibly important social history. Even fictional material, it's a really important social history of the time in which it was made and what people were talking and thinking about. But it's also just really good local footage of your local area. So film that was filmed around your area is crucially important visual information of what was happening at that time. When it comes down to it, it's so much more history that is simply being told and created in video formats now. A really good example was this year's Victorian Community History Awards. There was a really large proportion of those this year that weren't books, that were video formats and podcasts, which is something we're moving into sort of as well. And this is something we have to adapt. Next slide, please. Oh, hang on. No, not that one. No, I need the sourcing it slide. Sorry, Ellen, I sent these in the right order, so I'm not sure what's happened.
These are in the order I downloaded them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they weren't in that order in the PowerPoint, so never mind. There should be one called sourcing it, but that's all right. I'll just keep talking. Nope, that's the end. Yeah, it is. Thank you. This is where it gets tricky. So you can now still sometimes buy a physical character like a DVD or a Blu-ray, but increasingly this just isn't possible. So collecting born digital isn't the solution either, always, because creators are often really hesitant to sell an unencumbered physical file. And if they do agree, I mean, this is largely because of copyright and the concern of just disseminating these, if they do agree, they'll often ask to watermark it, which we're fine with because we just want the content, but sometimes they'll ask to pay for the watermarking. And for bigger programs, there's a hell of a lot of rights agreements, which just make it almost impossible. So where do we get it from? We buy it from big retailers. Umbrella is a particularly good example in Australia. That's really good, and they're producing a lot more Australian content now. I also buy and ask for donations from individuals. Finding out a video exists is half the problem. For example, we've just managed to acquire 12 documentaries about the Wedderburn region that I found because I stopped at the Wedderburn Tourist Information Centre and got talking to someone, and he donated them to us. I also go through lots of the local film festivals. So I go through MIF and see what's relevant. And I spend quite a bit of time emailing production companies. Op shops are also a really good resource. This
picture that's on the screen is the Merton Landcare, which I found at an op shop in Yark. Streaming versus owning is a really tricky thing that I'll come back to in just a second, but we don't have any streaming material. We want to own everything because then we control our content. We also just can't afford something like Canopy, and something like Canopy is also just not specific enough for us. We're happy to take something with loaning restrictions. So we've had managed to buy quite a few films that we can only make available in the library, and we're okay with it. We just want the content. We just don't want something we don't have control over how it can be accessed. All right, next one, please. Yeah, beautiful. Physical characters are fairly straightforward as far as format and the storage perspective goes. They're a hell of a lot easier to loan than their board digital counterparts. However, they do not last forever, which brings me to digitizing. We've digitized pretty much the entirety of our DVD and Blu-ray collection, which you can do within Australian copyright law as long as you're digitizing for preservation and you've made an effort to find the material in the format you're digitizing into. They don't usually exist in the format I'm digitizing into, so that hasn't been a problem. You can't loan the digitized material, but it can be made accessible in the library. While this isn't ideal, it means that we can make material accessible in more than one format and it protects the content longer term. It's not without its own pitfalls. We have a digitization material policy. And in these cases, we use AVI and MP4, and obsolescence is obviously absolutely still a problem. Born digital material comes with its own issues. File format's definitely one, as is storage. We're the unusual in that we have all our servers on site. And so we have an unusual amount of control of what happens with them. Our digital material, born digital and digitized, is stored on site, but it doesn't solve a space requirement. We've just got grant funding to significantly upgrade our on-site storage, which is going to solve that problem. But it's a temporary solution. We will have to keep upgrading. We do regular checks on the playability of files and any marking material that needs updates. Next slide, please. No, it's the future one. Yeah, that one. The future is going to be streaming, and this is where it's becoming a real problem. So SBS has closed its distribution department. I've been talking to them recently. You physically cannot collect any SBS specific documentary or fictional film. Anything that has been done by another production company you can sometimes get, but you have to email every production company individually, which is a real problem. ABC have stopped replying to my emails, and basically they treat these sort of requests as a request for documentary footage, which means they charge by the minute. So there are simply things that is just actually impossible to collect. So we're heading into what could be a real digital gap. So it's a problem on a national scale. Legal deposit laws, there is no national video legal deposit law. So NED doesn't handle it either. And South Australia, I believe, is the only state that has a state-based legal deposit law. So this is an area that really does have more questions than answers. So some of the answers are working with local communities so that people are comfortable donating or selling a video content that they've created. Advertising that we hold these types of resources, staying on top of digital obsolescence and thinking about how we catalogue the material to make sure it's as discoverable as possible. We use a fair bit of reparative description when working with these resources too. And always making sure to ask the question of the production companies, because sometimes they say yes unexpectedly. So it's always worth asking. And also making and collecting our own video content. So we live stream all our talks, download the video file, and I catalogue those individually. So that becomes part of the collection too. So what does this mean for the PMI's collection? Next slide, please. It's just the general collection one. It's one of the other ones. That's okay. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Basically, the variety and quantity of our video material is always growing. We have 353 individual movies, television programs, and documentaries. You can see examples on these slides. And that's pretty much the overall gist. This is still an area that has a lot more questions than it has answers, but it's something that we should all be involved in, trying to ensure that these resources are kept in our collections. And next slide. It's just the final one that has my email address. So one more. Yep, beautiful. I'm happy to answer any questions. That's all my contact info on the screen at the moment too. Lost City of Melbourne that's in the picture was one. I couldn't talk the creator to donating, but it came out on DVD eventually, and we managed to collect it that way. And that is pretty much everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That was fabulous. People can have the chance to hear you answer questions for a minute.
Yep.
So please put your questions in chat and Ellen will be able to respond. While we've got 30 seconds, I think it's a really interesting project because there are so many things about local areas that are shown on a whole lot of films, whether deliberately or accidentally. So it sounds a great project that your library's involved in collecting.
Yeah, I mean,
congratulations.
Thanks. A really good example is the SBS, the DNA of Us. I physically cannot collect that, even though it's got stuff on Bairnsdale and Geelong, which is really important for us because it's an SBS program and it's an SBS production. There is physically no way to possibly collect that, which is quite frustrating. SBS does not archive their own programs. Well, they do. They keep them for themselves, but they're not sending them to the Film and Sound Archive or the National Archives, I asked. So that's one of the questions. And PMI stands for Param Mechanics Institute. So yeah, we've been around since 1854. Yes, Liz, I haven't specifically reached out. I haven't sort of gone through YouTube, but yeah, I have. If I find something on YouTube that's relevant, then yeah, absolutely, I'll email them. Yeah, we're definitely pretty active. Thanks, Denise.
Look, please join me in thanking Ellen. That was fabulous. And yeah, I think an encouragement to really think about what's happening in your area in terms of various filming, because it does show changing areas.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Ellen,
no worries.
for that presentation. And sorry, the slides somehow decided to resort
right.
themselves.
Technology.
I'm hoping the slides for Louise Riley are in the right order. And we'll now be hearing from Louise Riley, talking about keeping track of local plaques and monuments. Louise is from New South Wales.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellen. And thank you for being my clicker, and we'll work through the slides. Yeah, so I'm Louise and I work in local history at Newcastle Libraries. I'm an archives customer service officer. And I work with Sue Ryan. She's the coordinator of local history. And we put this presentation together to present to the New South Wales Local Studies chapter. But we're not in the same place at the same time today. So I'll do my best. And if I miss anything, you can add some comments in the chat as I go along. So this is really a presentation that reports on an issue that is not isolated to Newcastle, and it's very much ongoing. And it's sort of prompted by the theft and vandalism of plaques and markers and monuments, and then the conversation that's then kind of followed around how do we keep track of them and how do we care for them and how do we keep them present when it's so easy for these things to sort of blend into the landscape and we walk past and don't notice them necessarily all the time. So how can we keep on top of them? Next slide, please. I'd like to acknowledge that I live and work on the lands of the Awabakal and Worimi people, and I pay respects to Aboriginal elders past and present and extend respect to any First Nations people with us today. And I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Thanks, Ellen. Next slide. Okay, so we know that plaques and markers take many forms. They're erected for a range of reasons, and they represent vastly different groups and communities. The presentation is definitely not about the ethics of monuments and memorials, and it's not political. It's a little bit like a meta-narrative. It's sort of talking about how in local history, we're sort of doing what we can to try and fill some gaps here and there. And it's really just telling the story as it's happening. So on the news on Saturday morning, Mark Matrikis, he's the chair of the Hunter branch of the National Trust. He was talking about this issue again. So he was saying that in October last year, 40 plaques had been stolen. By Christmas, it was 60. And despite increased community and police awareness, There are presently 70 missing plaques, but the thefts have extended now to public art. So panels and sculptural works are being taken as well. Next slide. All right, so this is a placeholder. It's where a plaque used to be. This is directly opposite Newcastle City Library, and it sits above the Captain Cook Memorial Fountain, which was designed by Muggle Hinder. There are many statues and monuments in Civic Park, which if you went down the stairs just to the right or the left, you'd be in Civic Park. And this is an example of many of the spots around our LGA, the sort of gaps or the absences, I guess, in the landscape. In this very specific instance, we're lucky we have the designs of what this plaque looked like, but it's not the case with many of them. So this one is not entirely lost. Next slide. Okay. There's a lot of news coverage on this issue. It's something that the community are very interested in. The Newcastle Herald, ABC Newcastle report on thefts. They report on council's responses and approaches. And on the radio on Saturday, Mark Matrikis was talking about how important it is for community to get involved in heritage and history, and to be more vigilant and aware of the landscape around us and the heritage that sits around us. Next slide. Oh, these ones are a bit out of order, but that's okay, we'll work with it. This one follows on from a post that was made by the Lord Mayor, Dr. Ross Kerridge. So he posted about the coal monument, and the coal monument, it sits in Parnell Place, which is not far from Newcastle City Beach. He was concerned about previous thefts in his post, and then, you know, sort of mused about how do we protect our cultural heritage, like the coal monument, which had some of the plaques stolen. And the community responses, as you can see, are varied, and themes around supporting the Lord Mayor and his sort of passion and commitment to heritage. There was other people who were reporting statues or plaques that had been stolen in other locations. Some speculate about who may have taken the plaques and why. And then others are calling on more police involvement. Next slide, please. Okay. Well, this one is not connected to the coal monument, but was a story where police arrested a man, and when they went through his van, they discovered this bronze plaque. It's the City of Newcastle coat of arms, and we think it had been taken from the City Administration Centre, which no longer is the local council building, but was previously. And while I couldn't find this plaque in our sort of catalogue indexes or on our collection database EMU, we have plenty of contextual information, photographs about the building, about its construction, about the dedication of the plaque and the coat of arms, to help build the story around it. So even if we don't have the specific records for the monument or the plaque itself, then we do have a lot of other contextual records we can rely on. Next slide, please. Beautiful. This one here is a statue of Joy Cummings. So she was Australia's first female Lord Mayor. And this was dedicated in 2019, so a relatively recent, I guess, statue and dedication. And you can see that the plaque underneath the statue itself has been taken. This is in a really public space opposite Civic Theatre near Newcastle Museum, a lot of foot traffic. And so that's one that we need to be looking into. So again, if you look at the screenshot from EMU, we have lots of great contextual information, not just about Joy Cummings, but about other plaques in our local government area. Next slide, please. I might skip that one. I kind of talked about that one already. That was about the coal monument. Maybe if you go ahead for me, there might be something else there. Let's go with this one. This one here is Sue and Justin and Elizabeth and I, in local history, we're thinking about what we can do in the meantime. So there are plans to take some action around doing an audit and creating a register and other sorts of things. But within local history and at officer level, what can we do? And so while we are out and about, we take photos, and photos on your phone, they hold some key metadata. They'll have a location that you've taken the photo. They have the date that you've taken it. So we are just trying to keep on a small scale a record of what we're seeing as we walk around, trying to be really aware of what's around us. I think that there may be other slides that are out of order, but I'm quite happy to leave it there. If you just want to go back to our contact details, that's it. Beautiful. So reach out if you have any questions or ideas, and I'll try and answer. I've seen some things coming up in the Q&A, so I'll get into there and have a look too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise, and my apologies that the slides seem to have rejigged. I'm going to stop sharing and do a new download and use the slides a different way in case that means that they're going to be slightly less chaotic. So please put any questions in chat, and I'm going to quickly, I've just got to get it open from Word, so I won't be long, so my apologies for this, but I figure it's better to take a moment now, seeing as we've got a couple that have proven that they're delinquent. Slides. Okay. So just waiting for Sunshine Coast to open and download. And yep, almost there. Okay, now I've got the situation of the first slide is not downloading. So Jenny, would you be okay to go even if the first slide is not downloading? Nope, you're muted.
How's that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I can share my screen maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's only the first slide. First slide has it just needed that extra 30 seconds.
No worries. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for listening in. Today, I'd like to acknowledge the Kabi Kabi peoples, the traditional land on which this presentation comes to you today. And the three of us here pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Our topic in Ellen had to write a new strategic plan back in 2023, and linked in with the local council here, and that was to grow the profile of the Heritage Library, increase our collections and donations, activate the content that we had here, and connect our customers with their local history. So if you go click on the next one, Ellen. Yep, and the next one. That's just a little bit of stats about us. So in our Heritage Library here, we're one of, we like the 9th branch in the service, and there are 3 of us on the team. All 3 of us are in the presentation today, so we should be able to answer all your questions. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. And the next one after that. I've jumped ahead. Right, so we decided that we would go with a kinesthetic workshop-based style of program, and they were programs that we developed depending on how we thought we could activate the content. So if we found it was we could identify it as suitable for a practical workshop, then we went about researching it in more detail and tried to link it to kinesthetic activities. So these were then presented every second month roughly across the 8 library branches. Some of the workshop, we initially started them at 10 per workshop. We had long queues or wait lists, people on the wait list. So we've now increased them to about 10 participants per branch. Some of the branches are quite tiny though, you can't fit more than 10 people in them. They're usually very popular. They're booked out as soon as they go live, and we found that the ones that were paid ticketed events had better show rates than the ones that were just free, but our show rates for the ones that were free were still pretty good. So we've been quite happy so far with the feedback that we get from the attendees, and I've got a slide further on that will show you some of that feedback. Thanks, Ellen. So some of the types of hands-on activities we decided to run, this one we've run multiple times now, called Repair Damaged Photos. This one we show the participants how to use their Android or iPhone to take a photo or scan their photo. Then we show them what software is available on their phone or on their PC so that they can repair and edit any of their images. And we found this workshop was really good at activating our Picture Sunshine Coast image collection, and in particular our Bill Robinson collection that's got over 20,000 images that we've now digitised. Next one, thanks, Ellen. The other one that we had there next is our Preserve Precious Books. This hands-on one ran our customers through the preservation process, how to clean a book, how to freeze it if it had mold or insects, how to get the things out of albums if they needed to sort of work on that, how to wrap a book. So we gave them all some archival paper and showed them how one's wrapped. We also showed them how to cut a 4-flap book enclosure if they wanted to store their precious books that way. We used the same process for if they had any artworks or fabrics, and that one activated our rare book collection that we had here, and we sort of took those books with us across all of the 8 branches. Next one, thanks, Ellen. Oh, is it going on to the next one? The next one was retro postcard stories. This one activated our ephemera collection and our Picture Sunshine Coast collection. We ran the historical side of it, was all about the history of the postcard and the postcards that we had in our collection here at the Sunny Coast. We ran it in October. October 4 was World Postcard Day, and we gave them a blank template for a postcard, lots of decals and stickers and images from our image database, and customers then created those ones. There's some samples that you can see that they made, and we encouraged them to post them off to someone on the 4th of October. Next one, thanks, Ellen. Okay, this one is our most popular one. We're running it again this year. It was our wildflower. We called it a paint and sip, but it's basically a painting workshop. I've got a couple of slides on this one to show you some of the wonderful work that our customers did. But this one was all about Kathleen MacArthur. She's a local environmentalist, wildflower artist, and every September here on the coast we have a wildflower festival, and we activate the collections that we have been donated by the MacArthur family, and the customers did wonderful work on this one. So this was one of our ticketed or paid workshops. I think I got $15 there, but it was actually $10. That got them a little canvas and all the acrylic paints. It was very popular, booked out within 24 hours of going live. And we took with us to each of the branches a collection of her watercolour paintings that were donated to us in the library. And just before I arrived here as supervisor in 2022, there was a podcast, 22-episode podcast series based on her lunch hour theatre scripts that she wrote. So if we click on the next slide, thanks, Ellen. We found that after we ran this workshop, that our podcast downloads for the Kathleen MacArthur lunch hour theatre scripts doubled. So it was really good activity for activating that collection and the content that we have. Next one, thanks, Ellen. I think there's one more flower one. All right, and next one after that. So this one was another very popular one. We wanted to focus on a topic, the local history of the area, and tap into Christmas. So we did this one on the history of the ginger growing industry on the coast. And because this one required a little bit of delicate work, what we did for this workshop was give a little bit of information about how the ginger industry operated and who was supplying the gingerbread houses, because we partnered with a local gingerbread production shop here in at Coolum, and they decorated their little panels first while they were flat on the desk. I ran through the history of the ginger growing industry while their decorations dried, and then we concluded with the construction of the gingerbread houses at the end. If you flick onto the next one for me, thanks, Ellen, you'll see some of the wonderful images of gingerbreads that were made by our customers. So they did a really good job, and the libraries just smelt divine, like gingerbread and icing sugar and lollies. And that one activated our Picture Sunshine Coast collection again. We have a lot of ginger history in that one, and all our publications on Yandina. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. There's Meredith there. She was our extraordinaire workshop leader for that one, and took the customers through the decorating process. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. This one workshop here, it was based on another art collection. This one was Harold Whittle's cartoons. He was a local cartoonist who wrote for the papers and did ads for the papers. So this time we thought, well, how could we activate this collection? Let's run a cartooning workshop. And this one sort of focused on the drawing techniques that Harold Whittle used in his cartoons. So we just ran customers through a little bit of history about cartoons, simple character drawing activities, and that one activated the Harold Whittle collection. It also increased the issues of books based on cartooning. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. We have really strong partnerships with the cultural heritage team here on the sunny coast. So when it's Harmony Day or Heritage Month, we run some activities together. So there's just some examples of the kinesthetic or hands-on approach we've taken to that as well. We've run a trivia night with trivia nights, so we've brought in the big buttons and everything. We had a hula dancing session, and I spoke about the La Balsa raft coming to the Sunshine Coast in the 70s. And just last month we had our classic cars on the coast. We invited some local car clubs to park up at the back of the library. So if you pop to the next slide, thanks Ellen, you'll see they brought their cars along for us. I had a little selfie car made up by the graphic design department there, and we had the cars park out the back. I took that little classic car then to one of our museum festivals, street festivals, and the kids loved poking their little heads out of that. So that was quite successful, that one. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. Last one, here's the statistics. So we've run eight workshops so far. We've had about 531 bookings. 78% is our average show rate, and our net promotional score is 82. I think our best one was 100% satisfaction rate for the classic cars, and I think it was 89% presenter score for the retro postcards. But you can see some of the comments that come back from the feedback from customers. So we've decided we like this format. It's really good fun to create the activities. Great to get the feedback from the customers, and it seems to be quite a successful way to activate local history. It's sort of almost giving people a little bit of history about fun activity to do at the same time. I think there's one more. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Jenny. Any questions will need to be asked in chat. That I think I love the way you did the analysis of it as well, really looking at the how it was activating different parts of your local studies collection.
Yep.
I'm sure you got great feedback from that. And there's a lot of really positive comments in chat, but please ask any questions in chat of Jenny and the other Sunshine Coast folk who are online at present.
Yep, Sash and Meredith are online, so we can answer any questions. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Our final presenter in this session today actually has a slightly longer session, and it's Jo Cooper from the State Library of South Australia, talking about a statewide collaboration called Spindle, Find Your Thread through South Australia. I'll just start sharing, Jo, and over to you.
Thanks, Ellen. Hello, everybody, again from this morning. What a fantastic group of presentations. Thank you to everybody. So many great ideas I'd like to try out, of course, with limited time and resources. So this presentation about Spindle is really a project around how we collaborate in South Australia around what we call our local history collections rather than local studies collections. And to explain, Libraries SA is our consortium in South Australia for all of our public libraries. And that is in collaboration with the State Library of South Australia. So we are fortunate in the state of South Australia to have a fantastic network of libraries that work together. And the reference to One Card is the fact that many years ago, about 12 years or more, we commenced a project to bring all of our public libraries onto the One Library Management System, which is why it's called One Card. And that's where the consortium has grown from, although we continue to have networking all the way through our history. So we'll move on to the next slide. Thanks, Ellen. So this project was primarily around looking for a digital solution for our local history content in South Australia. So the project was slightly broader than that, in that we were wanting to also focus on training and other sorts of ways that we could support the staff, the volunteers and the customers in public libraries with their local history collections. But for the purposes of this, I'm focusing on the digital solution. So we were looking to implement Recollect, which many of you may be familiar with, and I'll talk about the naming of that to Spindle in a moment, because we wanted to have efficient access and management. What we do have in South Australia at the moment under our library management system of Circe Dynex was we had been using the portfolio module, but not every public library was using it, and we were finding that it wasn't really meeting our needs. We also wanted to strengthen the relationships with community history groups and other providers in South Australia, knowing that for many of our public libraries, they work extensively with not only volunteers, but historical societies and other groups who also have collections too, and they may or may not partner with council. We wanted to build the staff and volunteer knowledge through shared training. It was I guess, noted that there were quite a few gaps there. It's not something that had been priority for quite a long time. And of course, as always with a good project, you want to maximise the funding and increase the resource sharing and reduce duplication in our collections. Thanks, Ellen. So moving on to the project model, we wanted to really leverage the existing consortium and network that we had. And we have had many projects in the past where we have done this, so that we knew that this would be successful if we gave it a go. We also wanted to focus on the community-driven development side of it. So many of us at the State Library have undertaken human-centred design approach. And some of our inspiration came from overseas, ironically, but also some of our colleagues interstate. So we have talked quite a lot to Montana about their history portal, and also Arizona State Library for their memory project. Both those states were looking to achieve something similar that we were wanting to do. In fact, Montana has been running their history portal for more than 10 years, in fact, maybe longer. And both of these state libraries and public library consortiums all use Recollect as well. And we wanted to be ambitious, but we knew that we wanted to break the project into key smaller steps so that we could work through that and see what traction we would get, not only with our network, but with the collections that we have. Thanks, Ellen. So this is a little bit about the timeline for the project. So stage 1 commenced in around 2021, moving into 22. And at that stage, some other staff members in the State Library conducted a bit of an analysis around what was happening with our heritage collections throughout the state. So they did a lot of visiting to public libraries, talking to lots of staff and volunteers about current state, essentially. And what we discovered is that we had a system where some libraries were really organised, and in fact were even using other systems, not Portfolio. So they had either developed their own, or they were using Flickr or other types of digital, predominantly open access systems online. And we wanted to see how we could assist and bring all this together. We then formed a working party, and there may even be a couple of people online today from that working party. And that was with 7 public libraries from around the state who formed this group to really look at how we would go about this project and to contribute. Stage 2 was really about the procurement, and we underwent an analysis of the systems that were out there to see what would most suit our needs. We then began extracting records and uploading content to our new Recollect website. And to be clear, this was from our existing portfolio module in Circe Dynex. And then we underwent the process of building the website and testing that. We are now at stage 3 as of around the end of 2024, going into 2025. And what we needed to do for that was, how do we pay for this system and the model that we're putting in place? So we underwent a consultation process with Libraries SA and the staff that work with us. That's been completed. And then we moved on to our implementation, which is in progress at the moment. So what we intend to do next as part of that implementation plan, of course, is all of the training which is required for the staff to upload content to the new system. But also we will be looking to expand that. So it's around bringing on a number of libraries at a time. We then would really like to expand that to the history groups and historical societies in a couple of ways, and that is through feedback and consultation on how the website works and what it looks like, and also then to start working on contribution from those groups with their own content from their collections. Thanks, Ellen. This is a quick run through really on what Recollect is. So if you're not aware, it's an online website that provides access to collections, digital collections. So a big focus on the digitisation of content. This discovery element, of course, engagement with the community and people using the website, and then the management and preservation of those collections. Thanks, Ellen. So moving on to Spindle, so you may wonder what Spindle is and what it means. We decided to adopt our own identity with using the Recollect website. The reason being is that many of our products and applications we use in South Australia, we just simply call it the LMS or whatever it is that we purchase and use throughout the consortium. But for this, we decided to rename it and have our own connection. And so we worked with a company called Nation here in Adelaide, who has previously worked with the State Library and Libraries SA on our product placement and how we market libraries and our services. So Spindle is the name we chose, which is around bringing the threads of history together. And so you can see there a bit of our tagline, I guess you'd say, and our explanation of what Spindle is. And this is what we're going with to really promote the website in the future. So next slide, please, Ellen. And as part of that, we adapted the branding. So the bookmarks that you see there at the top, that's what we already have for Libraries SA, but we've extended that to Spindle. So it's just pulling together all of our marketing, comms and collateral so that we have a consistent messaging for our community. And hopefully when the public uses it and starts to search the site, they'll realise there is that commonality there. And what we would like to do long term is really have that discovery layer across the top of all of our applications for a completeness of the collections in South Australia. Next slide, please. This is a little of what will be proposed for our marketing collateral. So this is some of the work that Nation did with us around Spindle. So that hopefully would be a brochure maybe in the future. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. So this is where we're at and the next steps for the project. So back in January and February, we did commence that consultation process on what the model would look like, ensuring that the work the working group had put together was something that would be adopted by all libraries in the state. We also wanted to collate all of our findings and feedback so that we could refine the project. This has meant that the project has been quite a long one, but it's been successful to date. We also needed to prepare some reports for our subcommittees and our libraries board to ensure that they were endorsing all of these decisions. And we also need an extraction plan for further records in Portfolio, which is the Cersei Dynex product. So then we moved on in March and April to presenting those reports with recommendations. Part of that meant, and the reason why I focus on this around the funding was because it's not so much around the product itself and the subscription to Recollect. it's more about the support that's needed to progress the project. What we've realised with a lot of these applications is unless you have somebody really driving it from not just an IT perspective, but bringing all the libraries together, providing the training, providing the support, the project doesn't really progress. When people are left to their own devices, they might lose interest or they're not sure what to do next. And so it's about bringing those people together and ensuring that they're on track, they do feel well supported, and that we can work together on the projects that we want to within the website and the system. Then coming up to May and June, which is where we are now, our model for the consortium for Recollect and Spindle was endorsed, as was the funding model. So the funding model is that all the libraries in South Australia will contribute to the costs of the application, and for a staff member to support the project as well ongoing. We're now in the process of informing and bringing all that information back to Libraries SA, and we have written our implementation plan, so that's where we're at. We're ready to go. Next slide, please, Ellen. So these are just a couple of screenshots around what Spindle looks like. If you're familiar with Recollect, you'll see it's the same template, which you would probably know and love. So we have when it's live, you have a carousel in the middle. So what we decide to do for Libraries SA is initially focus on photographs in the collections. Looking at our research, we determined that many community members are really looking for photographs and images of their local area. We can, as a state, then encourage people who are doing in-depth research to go back to their public library collection or to contact the state library. So we are commencing predominantly with photographs. Next slide, please, Ellen. The other thing that we have done is test all aspects of the system, and one part of that, which is a real feature of Recollect, is the mapping. So you can put in the geolocations into your catalogue record, and for those of you who don't know, and I don't have this marked because it's from the website, but this is from the Loxton area, the Riverland area in South Australia. And one of our public libraries who participated in the working group worked very hard to put up a whole series of photographs from their townships. So this map from Recollect Spindle shows the pins on the map, and you can drill into that and see the photographs all over the township. Next slide, please, Ellen. Another feature of Recollect Spindle is that it's very easy to use push notification for social media. So this is a photograph again from Loxton, which within, I believe it's 2 or 3 clicks, that's my personal Facebook page. Many councils and townships want to promote the content in their collection via social media, absolutely. And so with this, you can pull up a photograph, you can click on push to social media, it immediately publishes it, which is really handy for local groups, history groups, but also council who might do something like a Throwback Thursday or highlight something from the collection on a regular basis. Thanks, Ellen. So one thing that we did have existing for the State Library, who has been using Recollect for some time now, is school resources. So the staff here at the State Library have worked on for many years now about bringing together the local history content which relates to the school curriculum. And we have divided that up into per year level, which means that students, but also teachers who have history as a particular subject, can go into the website and it's all there for them with links and information. Makes it very, very simple and easy. In South Australia, it's Department for Education. So we worked with the teachers who in this space, and they've been really excited about this. So this is something we are transferring to the consortium Spindle. Next slide, thanks, Ellen. And this is just a drill down on that for Year 9 students who study within that year level World War I. As you can see there, it brings together all of the exhibition content essentially from the State Library of South Australia, including oral histories, photographs, archival material. And this is one of the benefits of Recollect as well. It is not a straight catalogue, it's about bringing these resources and the content to life. Next slide, thanks. So I thought I would end with some of the challenges and opportunities that have come about from this project, keeping in mind that we are just at implementation stage, so many more challenges and opportunities to come, I'm sure. So looking at challenges, I do think, and I know the Working Party would feel the same, that the model for the way we were working together as a consortium was as critical as the digital solution. And the reason I say that is because there was a lot of decisions to be made up front about how we were going to treat the website, how the content would work, how it would display, where the decision making sat, all of those sorts of things, which took, I would say, upwards of 12 months to work through. And so we could have easily just gone with the procurement and had looked at a digital solution, chose that and just went for it. But I'm glad that we took the time to research, and I would like to credit our colleagues interstate, many of whom we did contact about their use of Recollect, but also other systems too. We did have extensive conversations with the University of Adelaide who use Recollect too, and as I mentioned, Montana and Arizona. Montana in particular, we've been in constant contact with and asked many, many questions, particularly about their model too, because they have extended to not beyond public libraries to the school system, state records and archives. So they have quite an extensive network using Recollect. What we discovered as well, working with the staff who work with local history collections, is that this is not a criticism, it was just an observation, is that many of them didn't necessarily have in-depth cataloguing skills. So they had obviously an idea of cataloguing and how it all works, but being perhaps the lone person who worked with the collection, who worked with volunteers, or many councils are very dependent on volunteers who don't necessarily have a training in this area either. So the same with digital systems expertise around uploading content and how that all works. So many of the staff are familiar with digitisation, but not necessarily with these other areas. So we've had to work hard in building our training plan around that cataloguing and what support we provide to those staff and volunteers. And the other key area that we have found that we're still working through is there is a lot of confusion around what is metadata, what are the required digitisation standards and processes. So we already had this in place with our portfolio, which we've been using for some time, but there's obviously a gap there that we need to address. And the reason I say that is because our training plan, again, will have to include all of this, but also the online training. We cannot expect people just to be doing the training with Recollect without that support of these areas. Moving on to opportunities, I would say that we've had a lot of positive support all throughout the project, and it's been a really easy sell to tell people that we would have one digital solution for the whole of South Australia. Most libraries have said to me and to the project team, when can we start? It's not a we're not interested, it is we cannot wait for this to begin. How do we jump on board? So that has been fantastic. We've also had amazing support from the Libraries Board of South Australia and all of the councils, and of course the staff. The other opportunity that we have noticed is that we're looking to really remove duplication. There's a lot of duplication throughout our records, starting with the State Library all the way through. So one of our key principles has been that the content that we want councils to upload and make available should not already be available elsewhere. because there's not much point. We want the content to be really unique to that local area. This will probably take a bit of sorting through because often volunteers who are very well-meaning will want to take everything that they have within that collection, and what we've discovered is often there are copies of things that may not even belong to that or have any connection to that area, but people view it as important. So we're working through that as well. We also have discovered, as I mentioned with the staffing, that we can really drive the support for the project success. So it is being underpinned by some key staff who are taking the leadership role in this area, and that will be continuous and consistent. And then there is the opportunity to engage with the historical societies and with the leadership from council and libraries, because in some ways this is solving a problem for lots of different people who are grappling with this, and also with the preservation issues of local history collections. We've had some engagement with some history groups and societies that are connected to the working group. We haven't gone beyond that yet, but we've had lots of discussion with even volunteers from the National Trust who are very interested as well. So I think that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jo. That was really interesting, and I think it does sound really fascinating as with a statewide perspective on these things. And certainly it sounds like the hard work is going in up front so that the implementation goes smoothly and well. Yes. So please put any questions for Jo in chat. And again, please join me in thanking Jo and the other speakers this afternoon. I think it's been a really interesting mix of what's happening across quite a few states within Australia that everyone can learn from. And that certainly comes through from chat, that people are sharing ideas and information that hopefully people will be taking back to their own organisations and asking questions in locally. So thank you for those who've been active in chat too, as that all contributes to this. Now, I do want to remind you that this is actually a national collaboration. It was planned with people from several states, this year no territories, but from several states in Australia. So it is actually a bunch of states and states that have been involved in this, and more are always welcome. So thank you for coming along today and participating in chat. Thank you again to all the presenters, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow back for another wonderful day. Now, tomorrow there's a lot on oral history, digital preservation, and we have, again, the wonderful mix of 10-minute talks later in the day. So I'll close all this recording off, but I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye.